Hey guys, Stevebeav coming to you from Corvallis, Oregon, where the Oregon State Beavers this week host the Colorado Buffaloes in a compelling matchup of a pretty big Pac-12 card this week. 5 games on the docket here. Sonny Seattle called me up and said, "Hey, can you come on and drop some picks in?" So here we go. You know what? Might as well do this. This sounds like a fun deal. Got a couple minutes, so let's just hit this. This week. Let's just roll down the Pac-12 games this week. I really it's a pretty interesting card. I think the biggest game of the week is really in Seattle, where at the start of the year you wouldn't have said that. You would have really thought that it would have been in Tempe with the battle for the South there, SC and Arizona State. I think it's in Seattle. I think that this is compelling. I think that Seattle, UW, after seven win Sark. Has put together all these, decent years. They're proclaiming themselves as back, and with Price throwing a tremendously efficient rate. And if you watched any of that Illinois game, you saw him make some pinpoint passes that may really indicate that he may have taken that next level as that premier senior quarterback in the conference. Right now, he's making that claim, and it's really coming together for Washington quite well. Their balance is tremendous. So after those 7-win seasons in a row, 3 of them in a row, it's time for Washington in Sark's 5th year, I believe it is 5th year. It's time for them to sort of make their move, and this is kind of their spot on Fox National TV, the primetime game. I think they will. I really like. I really like Washington to just house Arizona, even at 8. Even giving up 8 points with Washington is a steal. I think that Arizona's got so many more issues. They haven't played anybody. They had the 12th easiest schedule in the conference, by far the easiest. They played three tomato cans essentially. Vegas, they played UTSA, and they've played a AFCS team. So they have not played anybody. So and their numbers are still not reflective of a team that would really be that dominant. Their scores are, but from going from that quarterback that they had in Scott to Danker, it's apples to hammers at this point. Danker has not seen the kind of pressure that he's going to see in Seattle, that kind of game pressure. UW Husky Stadium, Jaws, has gone from a difficult venue to a renovated. I guess it's a hornet's nest up there now. The seats are pushed in. It's louder. This is kind of another one of those great kickoff games for UW after they made that big splash on August 31st, beating Boise State so bad. I mean, they really did handle them. Boise State looks to be a little bit down, and then UW has taken care of business since. So UW is probably trying to make that move towards a top 10 ranking, as UCLA is. A different deal, but Washington is in a spot here where they should just house Arizona. Arizona is 12th in the conference in special teams rating, and in their talent level in their special teams are rated 12th. Washington has some discipline issues. They just do. They're at the lower end of the conference in penalties. They're fifth worst in the country in penalties. They usually are. Just going to a couple of games in Seattle in the Sark years, it really is somewhat alarming to me, standing on the sidelines watching this team and the way that they interact. They seem to be an incredibly loose bunch, and not much reins there. Just a feeling that a lot of folks are emanating that is coming out of the Sark camp up there at Montlake. So but I just think this is the spot where Washington is just going to roll, and I just don't. The 8 points are irrelevant. That 7 to 8, that obviously famous last words, but I just don't think that Arizona will be able to stay with Washington. I look like a 30 to 10 type of a 31 to 10 type of a game here. I think Washington will roll. The game here in town, Oregon State hosting Colorado. Colorado is an interesting deal. Their quarterback Webb passed Sean Mannion this last weekend by default without playing into second place in the conference. And by default, he moved into second place in the country in passing. He now has that big play threat with Richardson up there. As McIntyre, the first-year coach from San Jose, said that he was really surprised when he got to Seattle or when he got to Boulder at the amount of talent that was actually still in the cupboard there. It seemed like a kind of a destitute situation. Phil Steele said the same thing. He said Colorado's got, when you assess the talent that they have, it's actually quite good. They had the second most lettermen back in the conference. A lot of starters back. They're a pretty solid group. Yet I think that they're a little overmatched in Corvallis. The problem at Oregon State is injuries this year. From that 9-3 regular season of last year, as Phil Steele would tell us, their stock report was already going to be kind of low because they were so injury-free last year. Mannion was their only injury. They lost one starter, game start off their defense all season last year. This year's been a different deal. 3 of their top 7 front 7 players are out. Especially missing Michael Doctor, who was the speed rush person off the corner that could provide a lot of sacks. Their still sacks are quite good against Utah and against San Diego State. They got to the San Diego State quarterback 5 times last week against a pretty decent, experienced offensive line. So I think Oregon State is in better shape defensively than people might think. It's their offensive line, where last week, during the second quarter of that game, all 5 offensive linemen were playing at a new position, either 2 with 2 starters out and with 2 other makeshift starters put in. The real proof of the pudding and how devastating injuries can be is when coaches start burning redshirt years. Mike Riley went 7 years with burning 1 redshirt year. Last week, the Beavers burnt 2 just on the offensive line. So that's an indicator of just how deep these injuries are cutting into the Beavers. It's just hard to have continuity. They're not running the ball at all. They ran the ball for 20 yards last week on 10 carries. And a lot of people are around here are up in arms that you can't win without running the ball. Well, they have won without running the ball. In the past, even in the Jaquiz Rogers years, in 2008 and 2009, the Beavers were second in the conference in 2008, second in the conference in 2009, of course, to Oregon. But they were second in the conference in total offense while they were 9th in rushing. They just run the ball enough to allow the pass to set up the run late. Doesn't necessarily look great, and it does worry teams, but the Beavers also instituted last week for the first time, they started the fly sweep again. Every time that Mike Riley's confronted with one of these kind of challenges, a small wrinkle will be instituted where they can run the ball. I think that instituting those fly sweeps late in that game against San Diego State created a situation that will give Colorado another thing to scout for. Similar to what Oregon does with their 2-point conversions. Similar to what a lot of teams do with defensive packages. It gives teams extra things to scout for that allows the actual scouting they do to be minimized at every different unit. So in any case, Oregon State, I think that they're so underrated coaching-wise. This is McIntyre's really first big road game. And again, as Phil Steele and as Mark Lawrence would tell us, first-year head coaches in their big first key road game win about 37% of the time against the spread. And this is just one of those cases. I like Colorado. I'm using them in a teaser with Middle Tennessee State, a 1-unit teaser, plus 28 with Middle Tennessee, plus 17 with Colorado. 7-point teaser, a lot of vig that we have to buy, but I really like Colorado to stay around. I don't think Oregon State is solid enough to really build up a double-digit lead for too long. I like Colorado to hang around like a 28-19 game or something like that, like a 28-17 type thing. So I like Colorado to stay close, but I'm not going to even touch that as far as Colorado plus 10 or something like that. The other conference games, this Arizona State hosting SoCal game is pretty interesting. 2 just phenomenal defenses that are having, these 2 teams are having unthinkably odd years, I really thought that Arizona State was that team. I thought that Arizona State was the team that looks like Washington is. I thought that Arizona State was going to win the South. They had 13 of their 14 returning starters were seniors. They had third most starting seniors in FBS from a team that was disciplined last year. That team last year was first in the Pac-12 in fewest penalty yards. They had an experienced senior quarterback. They still, I mean, they really have everything and a tremendous defense led by Will Sutton. I mean, they just seem to not have any holes, and their schedule seemed to be better than I thought. Folks thought that they had the third toughest schedule with Notre Dame and Dallas and all those things, but they didn't play any non-home road games out of conference. They have SC at home. That loss at Stanford really surprised me how much Stanford got into them so quickly and so deeply. Arizona State made some sort of a late comeback. It was mainly, in my opinion, it was more Stanford taking their focus off the ball. But in any case, this is a compelling game, and it's a one touchdown spread for Arizona State. I think Arizona State wins this game. I think that they actually have an offense. I think when two great defenses get together, the team with the much more balanced, better offense usually comes out, especially at home. I think Arizona State's in just a tremendous letdown spot. USC seems to be getting better, and their defensive numbers are getting so much better and so dominant that this one just kind of spooks me. I wouldn't touch it, but I think Arizona State wins this game. The other one, Stanford at Washington State, I'm having a hard time with. I just don't know. I think Washington State is where Ted Miller with ESPN was really was touting Arizona as his scary team, his sleeper team in the Pac-12. I really looked at Washington State. I thought that last year, I don't think Mike Leach understood all the bad apples that he had up there, and he weeded all those out. They have the most returning lettermen in the conference, even with the bad apples he weeded out. I think he's getting his air raid going. They have a big signature win at SC. I really think Wazoo this is a scary spot for Stanford. I think that Stanford woke up in that second half, or they'll wake up here knowing that they're not a perfect outfit. I watched all of that game that Stanford had at Army, and Stanford seems to just take mental lapses for periods of time. I don't really see that because I think Shaw is such a phenomenal coach. He was the man with the stand plan all the way through those Harbaugh years. He was kind of the bedrock part of that. I think. I mean, from everything that we read from behind the scenes in Palo Alto, Shaw was really kind of the brains behind it, and Harbaugh was really the master. Was really the mayor of that situation. But in any case, that's a compelling game. But I'm not getting anywhere near it. The last game on this docket is Cal at Oregon. Cal's just has faced the toughest team. The combined record of the FBS teams that they're facing in their first 3 FBS games, including this one, is 32-3 from last year, from Northwestern, Ohio State, and Oregon. They're just facing a gauntlet that a meat grinder that you just wouldn't put any team through. But that said, Sonny Dykes has quickly instituted this his crazy offense there, and it seems to be working. Number 1 quarterback in all of college football in passing in Goff as a freshman. But I think that what we see with Oregon is a team that is giving up some numbers, with they could, even though Mariota at last report from RJ Bell would tell us, Mariota had moved ahead of all other Heisman hopefuls as a 9-2 odds to win the Heisman. I think that last week is a perfect example of how Mariota was, or the week before, because this is a bye week too. Oregon's coming in off 2 weeks. So what Mariota was doing, Scott Frost, the offensive coordinator, was Mariota was passing the ball as kind of his personal plaything, just to use that wrinkle to see how many yards that they could compile and polish off their passing game. 467 yards for Oregon passing, even in the Chip Kelly years. During most of those years, that would have been unthinkable. Yet they did that, and they just get in and on teams so quickly. I saw something in Football by the Numbers that broke down big plays, and that's kind of what Football by the Numbers does, is look at it. They really value big plays over everything else. And one little side note on that is that Mike Riley did a study when he was 20-some years ago when he was in the Canadian Football League about big plays. And what he said was, if you can limit teams' big plays, 25 yards or more, if you can limit them to one or less a game, preposterous. But his theory was, if you can limit big plays no matter how, no matter what, you'll win. If his team had double or at least one more big play than the other team, they always won. And at the end of his CFL career, and even now, he says that that's an 88% ratio where big plays will win. Oregon has produced 10 times more big plays than any other FBS team. 10 times. Their average, which a big play by this definition is 20 yards or more. Oregon has produced dozens of them per game, where most teams are happy to get half a dozen. Literally, most teams will average 7 big plays a game, 25 yards or more. Oregon this year has averaged 30 of them. And that's just a phenomenal number. And how you can get out in front of that, I just don't understand how you can really put that in perspective. That's why I think Oregon will not be touched this season. I don't think Stanford has too many lapses. I think that revenge spot, the planets aligned perfectly last year, and they got some key stops, so I can't put my finger on how they did it, but they did. And same with SC the year before. The 2 losses that Oregon's had over the last couple of years, Oregon's 47-6. As much as it pains me to say it, I just don't know how any team is going to stop that this year. On top of all that, the things that I think that people miss with Oregon, never hear it said. I occasionally hear mention of defense. But when we look at Phil Steele, for instance, start to rate defenses, defensive backs, in a heavy pass conference in the Pac-12, of course, it's getting more rushing, but it's a heavy pass conference. When you look at defensive backs, you look at where Oregon ranks, and I just got to find it here because it's worth mentioning that with everything that can be said about Oregon's offense, we check out Oregon's defensive backs. Phil Steele ranks Oregon's defensive backs number 1. So how do you compete with that? How do you, just getting your head around that. They're coming in here as a 37-point favorite. I think that they can obviously name their scores. I just don't touch lines that big, over 4 touchdowns. It just involves too many messy yards, too many garbage, messy late yards to really get near it. For my money anyway. But I think it's a fairly safe bet. I just wouldn't do it. I'm taking it in a teaser. I'm taking Oregon. All that said, I'm taking them in a teaser, minus 30, and I'm taking that with Central Michigan plus 28, plus 29. Excuse me. And I just think Central Michigan is such a dog right now. They're everyone's so down on them that eventually those numbers reach a point where they're valuable. And I think Central Michigan is in that spot against an NC State team that's stinging and it has some key injuries. I just think that's a nice spot there to take Central Michigan plus 4 touchdowns, more than 4 touchdowns, against an Oregon team getting 30. I think that Oregon wins 55-10 or something, but I'm just not getting anywhere near the other part of it. The other couple games I like. So that's the Pac-12 card. The only game I really like, truly like on that board is Washington minus 8, and I'm taking that 2 units. Washington minus 8 against Arizona, 4 o'clock Pacific on Fox. So the other games on my card, quickly. Northern Illinois, I think is a gold mine there at Purdue. Purdue gives up a lot. They don't rush the ball well. Purdue is really a down program right now. I think they're kind of a mess there. And Northern Illinois is I think a lot of folks are putting stock in their 45-35 win at Idaho as though Northern Illinois is not very viable. I think Northern Illinois' defense has come a tremendously long way this year with only 4 starters back. They're getting to the quarterback tremendously well. 4.5 times a game they get sacks. And Purdue is a makeshift offensive line. They've got injury issues. I think Northern Illinois -4 in West Lafayette I think is a gold mine there. I don't see how. I just really like Northern Illinois -4. I also in the other, speaking of that Iowa team, I like Minnesota in Minneapolis. -1 against Iowa. Minnesota, when you look at that team, a lot of people mention their offensive line injury issue. I think that one player that was out, I think his name is Olsen, is back in. Minnesota now, again, has their entire offensive line back, and they are rushing the ball up to 60 times a game at 333 yards a game. You talking about your Big Ten meat grinder team. Minnesota has the personality of a team that lines up and with and this Olsen kid we're talking about is 6'7", 330. I mean, they have a absolutely behemoth Big Ten line that actually makes Wisconsin's look a little smaller. So I mean, Minnesota is just an absolute hammer of a team, and they're rushing the ball every game. It's gone from 40 to 45 to the 50s, and last game it was 59 times. In Iowa, their coach is under fire. France is under fire for that 4-8 year that they had last year. Iowa, speaking of sacks, Iowa doesn't give up any sacks, but Iowa is inept. I looked at a lot of numbers with them. I just don't like Iowa at all in this spot. I think Minnesota at 4-0. A lot of folks are looking at their coach, all the health issues he's having, and they're not looking at the body of work. Granted, it's come against San Jose State and Vegas and teams like that. But Minnesota, again, has that rushing game that is just going to be almost impossible for Minnesota or for Iowa to stop. I think Minnesota wins that game, and I think that they win pretty easily. I think that that's a good spot for Minnesota right there. Besides that, the only other game that is really on my radar, it's a pretty small card for me. A lot of these lines moved out of range. And we're just not going to put money, good money, into things where we don't like. We're just not doing it. So the only other game I like is Florida at Kentucky. I like the under in that game. And I don't play a lot of totals, and most folks know that, but I just don't play a lot of totals. But this game, Florida's defense, I mean, just considering Florida last year to this year, Florida was 12th with Driscoll at quarterback, who now, of course, we know is out. And Kentucky will be able to scout for the backup quarterback for all week this time, so it's not going to be a surprise to them. So they're going to be able to come up with some schemes to sort of slow Florida down. And Florida's offense was just inept last year, and they still ended up at the 12th best offense in the SEC out of 14 teams. They still ended up with 11-1 regular season record. How does that happen? It happens because their defense is just so stellar, and they put so many players in the NFL. But their defensive front seven is on par with Florida State, is on par with Alabama. It's right there with all of those. Every single area you look at, they just don't have a defensive weakness. When they're playing a team that ranks 12th, 14th, 12th, 13th in the SEC in offensive rating unit, I just don't see how Kentucky stays anywhere, puts any points on the board against this Florida team, or much less gets the ball past midfield. Now, of course, fluky things happen, short field scores, things like that. But I think 47.5 points, when we really crunch the numbers, it's looking more like a 34 to 37 range. I think that under is just such a square play, but a moneymaker, I think. I just don't see how that's not a money-making play. 47.5. Florida, Kentucky under. It's going to be like a 20-10, 20-7 game. I kind of like Kentucky to hang around. they didn't have an SEC win last year. They haven't had an SEC win since 2011 when they beat Tennessee 10-7. They snuck out a win on the last game. Kentucky is really a bit of a mess. They've fallen behind teams early and often. They lost to Western Kentucky of all things in their first game. I had that play as a money line play. I just thought Western Kentucky's pretty decent, and Kentucky's it's just not a good football team right now. 2-10 last year. They haven't done anything to improve with a new coach with Stoops. I just don't see Kentucky staying with this, or being able to score any points. And Florida can't either. So especially with Kentucky with a weak to scheme, I like the under in that play. And I don't play a lot of unders. There's some teasers I like, but I'm not going to play. And that's really my whole card right there. Is Washington -8. I like Northern Illinois -4. I like the under in the Kentucky-Florida game. I like Minnesota a lot, -1. And that's the crux of my card. I like it. I have a 1-unit teaser also with Oregon -30 over Cal at home, and Middle Tennessee +29 in Provo on one of those midweek games. Middle Tennessee is 7-2 against the spread in those midweek Sun Belt weird games. Although, those teams are shifting conferences so much that it's kind of hard to tell where the Blue Raiders are. But they're a solid team and some of their numbers were on the very, very high end as far as offensive line returning starts and defensive tackles back, and a pretty decent unit put together. That's really all I know about them, other than BYU is really stinging off another loss on a short week. I just like Middle Tennessee to stay within 4 touchdowns or probably less. So that's the card. I gotta give Sonny a big prop here. I really appreciate you reaching out to me. Do a lot of local radio here, but I'm always happy to do stuff on pregame. What's worth doing is worth doing for money. So all these games that we're capping, putting real money on, and it's a kick in the ass is what it is. College football is great. 2 games. We get to go to 2 games on Saturday within 40 miles of each other. Our game's at noon. The game in Eugene is at 7:30. What could be better? College football. What could be better than spending time talking about college football? I can't possibly imagine what that would ever be. Got the Beaver Bets crew coming in town. Big week of tailgating. Big week of handicapping games. We'll be down on the field in Eugene, so look for me down there, and look for some live tweets during the game if I can get data. The only way you can get that anymore is if you're up in the press box and you're wired in. But we're going to do it anyway. We're going to get a couple photos if they let me. The sports information directors don't like you doing that, so that's why you don't see a lot of game photos from me. I like to get my credentials, so that's why you don't see a lot of that. Just a little tip for you guys out there. If we need to have a little workshop on how to get credentialed, let's do that, because talk about what's worth doing for money. This is, if you can figure out ways of getting on the field for these games, you will never, ever regret it. The team speed and the things you see on the field that allow you to handicap these games, just you can't put a price on. So in any case, I want to give Sonny a huge thanks. I want to give Pregame a huge thanks. I want to give a little jab to my pal Goodfella for just being there and being Goodfella. And I want to say one quick thing to RJ, that I appreciate his Thursday NFL. I don't do any NFL really, but I really appreciate his tips on that. I think we can all learn a lot from that alone. The stuff that's being put out there, the free stuff, I really appreciate. I'm not pandering one bit. I really appreciate all of that stuff that everyone's doing. Sonny, this is a great idea you have here. It's kind of a neat little forum. It's great. So I'm going to sign off. Go Beavs. I'm just kidding. No, just kidding, GF. Go Ducks, I guess. So you guys have a great weekend. College football, week 5. Make some money, kill the books, and I will talk to all of you guys later. And go Beavs.